cross and crucifix. The thoughts came to mind as I sat in church one Sunday morning, where we have to keep 2 meters apart, and on the chairs that we're not to sit on, there was placed a cross, a palm cross. And as I sat there, I suddenly decided that I was surrounded by crosses. And I've often wondered that at the time of Jesus, people living in villages and towns, if they felt the same, because there was always a cross with somebody nailed to it, stuck on a village outside a town. Looking at the history of the cross, I've been very surprised how often it was used before and after the time of Jesus. The number of variations of it, I've learned a lot. The first one I came across, and the oldest one, was a T-shaped cross called the Tor cross, named after the Greek letter T, and it was found amongst ancient Egyptians as a symbol of eternity. The cross that we see most, the cross of suffering and self-sacrifice, we see it inside and outside churches. The cross with 2 cross members, the top one being shorter, is known as a patriarchal cross and is often used by people in authority in the church, such as bishops. The cross with 3 cross pieces, the shortest one at the top, is known as a papal cross, used by the Pope and can be seen inside the Vatican building. Then there is the Greek cross, with equal vertical and cross members, and is often found in Greek Orthodox churches. Sometimes the Greek cross is seen with a circle around it, or against a round background. This cross is known as the consecration or dedication cross. And incidentally, if we look at our church in Kinver, the old church building, you'll find above the door, high on the roof, a cross with a ring round it. And also as well, if we look at this in the church as we go about, we find the cross on the Sunday service handbook. We find it on the back of our church newsletter. And finally, we find it on the front of our church circuit plan. Crosses were usually made of wood, but some stone crosses can be found in village greens and in marketplaces, and they were quite common at one time to remind people of their faith. Many of these were destroyed, but they can still be found in churchyards, and often they're much older than the church building itself. And some of these crosses had a crucifix on top, but these were destroyed during the Reformation. Surprising where crosses are found apart from churches and churchyards. If you watch television, you'll often see a cross placed in somebody's home or even outside on a wall. People are seen wearing crosses as necklaces or a buttonhole. Some sportsmen can be seen crossing themselves as they go out to play on the pitch. Then there's our national flag as we see flying, the Union Jack, which has 3 crosses representing St. George, St. Andrew and St. Patrick. Now a few more comments about the crucifix. It was something that I'd never thought about until we started travelling on the continent at holiday times. And it can be seen in old village churches, especially in Italy and France. It was usually placed in a prominent position, showing the agony of Jesus on the cross. But before the 11th century, the image of Jesus on the cross was not shown as him in agony. He was shown as a king with a crown, with open arms, outstretched, welcoming people into his presence. The crucifix as we know it today was common in English churches until the time of the Reformation, when they were all destroyed. Now we find it only in Roman Catholic churches, together there with a normal cross. Although it can be seen in some old churches, if you look at the windows, you'll find them. If the windows haven't been destroyed, the crucifix can often be seen there. Having said all this about the cross, it was very rarely seen before the 4th century when Christians met to worship, although there was one found in the city of Pompeii, which was destroyed in AD 79. Now, what does the Bible tell us about the cross? I couldn't find it mentioned at all in the Old Testament. We will find it referred to quite often in the book of Acts and in the following letters to the various churches and people. But Jesus, as I could find, only uses the word cross on 5 occasions. In Matthew, he mentions it twice. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 38, Jesus tells the people following him they must take up the cross or they will suffer. And again in chapter 16, verse 24, Jesus tells his disciples they must take up his cross. Luke mentions it twice. In chapter 9, verse 23, Jesus reminds us to deny ourselves and to take up his cross daily. And in 14:27, Jesus tells us if we do not carry his cross, we cannot be his disciples. Mark's book in chapter 8, verse 34 to 37, sums it all up what I've been saying nicely. And it says this: Then he called the crowd to him, along with his disciples, and said, If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his own soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his Father's glory. I wonder what Jesus' feelings were when he spoke about the cross, knowing how he was going to suffer himself. Because Jesus never asked us to do anything that he was not prepared to do himself. And again, I read from John chapter 19, verses 16 to 18, where the word cross is mentioned, but Jesus not saying it. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus, carrying his own cross. He went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is Golgotha. Here they crucified him with 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Now shall we have a prayer? Lord, remind us at this time of the year, when God sent his only Son into the world, that the cross has the power to change lives. It is the ultimate act of self-sacrificial love. You love the world so much that your Son was born, lived, and was crucified, but rose again, in order that we can enter into your presence and experience the joys of Christmas forever. In Jesus' name we ask this. And finally, one last thought before we have a look at our hymn. When the Christmas cards begin to arrive, and on the front, instead of Christmas greetings, we see the word Xmas greetings, do we see that cross as a cross of suffering, or as a kiss as a cross of love. When I survey the wondrous cross, on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride.